The radio spoke to me before I understood what it was saying. I know how that sounds. I know. But on the night of October 14th, I was sitting in my basement at 2 a.m, headphones pressed to my ears, scanning the shortwave bands the way I had done every night for 11 years. And something answered back. Not in words. Not at first. It was a frequency. A low, wet hum. Like the sound a refrigerator makes when it is dying, when the motor struggles and the whole appliance shudders. Somewhere between 6.8 and 6.9 megahertz. A place in the spectrum where nothing should be transmitting at that hour. I wrote the number in my log. I always wrote everything in my log. Then, beneath the hum, a voice, distorted, slowed down, like a record played at the wrong speed, like someone speaking through a mouthful of wet cloth. I turned the tuning dial a fraction of a millimeter to the right. The voice sharpened. It said a name, Dorothy Kellen. Then it said a number, 47. Then it said a street, Birchwood Lane. Then it said Wednesday. And then the static swallowed it whole. I sat there for a long time. My basement smelled like Salter and old carpet, and the cold that seeps through concrete walls in October. I could hear my own breathing. I replayed the recording on my digital receiver. Because I record everything, habit, always. And listened 3 more times. The voice was real. The name was real. The street was in my town. I told myself it was a prank, a pirate broadcast, some teenagers with a transmitter, and too much free time. I went to bed. I did not sleep. Wednesday, Dorothy Kellen died. The notice was in the community board newsletter. She was 47 years old. She lived at 31 Birchwood Lane. She had collapsed in her garden with no prior warning, no history of illness. The official word was cardiac event. Unexpected. Devastating. I stared at the newsletter until the words blurred. Then I went back to the basement. I found the frequency again that same night. It took 40 minutes of searching, sweating, hands shaking so badly I kept overshooting the dial. But I found it. The wet hum was already there, waiting for me. This time the voice gave 3 names. 3. I wrote them all in the log. I wrote them exactly as I heard them, letter by letter, because the distortion was bad enough that I could not trust myself to interpret. I wrote the names. I wrote the ages. I wrote the streets. I did not sleep at all that night. The first of the 3 was found 4 days later. Heart attack, the report said. Then the second, 11 days after that, a fall. The third, I will not describe it, but the name in the log matched the name in the obituary. By then, I had stopped eating regular meals. My wife, we had been separated for 2 years, but she still called on Sundays. Asked me on the phone why I sounded different. I said I was tired. She said I sounded like I was standing very far away. She was right. I was. I was standing at the edge of something vast and dark and patient, and it had noticed me. Here is the thing about the frequency that I have not told you yet. I played the recordings for other people. My neighbor Marcus, a retired electrician who had always been curious about my equipment. I sat him down and played the clearest recording I had, the one from October 27th, through the best speakers in my setup. He heard static, only static. He looked at me with that careful face people use when they are worried about you, and he said, "Brother, I don't hear anything in there. Just noise." I played it for the woman at the electronics shop where I bought my components. She cocked her head, listened for 2 full minutes, and said the same. Just noise. I played it for my doctor at my November checkup because by then I was desperate enough to sit in a medical office and press my phone speaker toward a man in a white coat. He heard nothing. He said the word stress twice and sleep 4 times, and he wrote me a prescription I never filled. Only I could hear the voice. Only I could hear the names. So I made a decision that I now understand was the worst decision of my life. I decided to warn them. The next name on the list. I had been collecting them for 6 weeks by then, and the list was now 9 names long. Was a man named Gerald Price, 61 years old. Cedar Road. I found him in the directory. I stood on his porch on a Tuesday evening with cold rain coming down the back of my collar and my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The man who opened the door was big, red-faced. He looked at me the way people look at strangers who show up unannounced in the rain. I told him I had reason to believe he might be in danger. I told him he should see a doctor immediately. I did not mention the radio. I was not ready to mention the radio. He stared at me. He asked me who I was. I gave my name. He told me to leave his property. I left. Gerald Price died on a Friday. Aneurysm. They found him in his workshop. I sat with that for a long time. The rain had started again by the time I went back to the basement that night. I could hear it drumming on the small window above my workbench, a sound like fingers tapping. The smell of the solder was heavier that night, almost sweet, almost wrong. I found the frequency faster now. My hands knew the dial. The voice was already mid-transmission. It was not giving names. It was giving mine. Not my full name, just my first, my age, my street, and a day. Saturday. I ripped the headphones off. They hit the workbench and sent a coffee mug. The one with the faded logo from a radio convention. The one I had been using for 9 years. Off the edge. It shattered on the concrete floor. The sound was enormous in the small space. A crack like something breaking that was not ceramic at all. I stood there in the cold and the quiet, and the smell of spilled coffee. And I breathed. I told myself, this changes nothing. The people on the list did not know they were on the list. Maybe if I had known, maybe if I had heard my own name earlier, maybe I could do something they could not. Saturday was 3 days away. I did not sleep. I barely left the house. I called my doctor back, and he talked me through what he called acute anxiety. And I thought about how useless that phrase was. Friday night, I went back to the radio. I do not know why. I need you to understand that I do not know why. It was compulsion. It was the same gravity that makes you look down from a ledge. I found the frequency. The hum was different tonight. Lower, slower. Something in the rhythm had changed, and the hair on my arms stood straight up through my sleeves when I noticed it. The frequency had always felt external, something broadcasting at me. Tonight it felt close. Tonight it felt like the sound was coming from inside the room. The voice came. And this time it was not distorted. This time it was clear and flat and dry. Like a man reading a list, like a man who does not need to perform the words because the words are already true. It said, "You found us because we needed you to find us." I pressed the record button. Old habit. The others did not understand what they heard. You understood. That made you useful. Useful. My mouth was completely dry. The cold from the floor was coming up through my shoes. I said, out loud, into the empty basement, "What are you?" The hum shifted, almost like breathing. "We are the interval," the voice said, "between the last heartbeat and the next thought. You call it static. We call it space. I said, the people on the list. Did you kill them? A pause, long enough that the rain outside changed tempo, long enough that I started to believe the transmission had ended. Then, we announce, we do not cause. You must understand the difference. I thought about Gerald Price and his red face and his workshop and the way he looked at me on his porch. Then why give me my own name, I asked. Why am I on the list? Another pause. You are not on the list, the voice said. The hum cut out. Clean. Absolute. The frequency was gone, and no matter how long I searched that night, and I searched until dawn whitened the basement window, I could not find it again. You are not on the list. I turned that over in my mind all through Saturday, waiting, flinching at sounds, staying away from stairs, from the stove, from the car. Nothing happened. Sunday came. Monday. A week passed. I was still alive. And then I made the mistake of looking at the log again. Not the current log. The old log. The one from before October 14th. The one I had filled with ordinary notations, call signs, and frequencies, and atmospheric conditions. I had been reading the log in order, working backward, looking for any sign that I had caught the frequency before, without realizing it. I found the sign. September 3rd. 6 weeks before the night I heard Dorothy Kellen's name. In my own handwriting, in my own cramped notation style, a frequency entry at 685 megahertz. Duration, 4 minutes. Content, strong distortion. Possible voice signal, no decode. September 3rd. I flip to the back of the log. I keep a separate section for news clippings and community items relevant to transmissions. Interference reports, local events. Habit. I always kept those records. September 10th. A death notice in the newsletter. A man I had not known. No address I recognized. I went further back. I pulled the older logs from the shelf the years before. Scanning for 685 megahertz, I found 7 entries. 7 nights across 4 years, when I had noted distortion at that frequency and marked it undecoded. For each one, within 8 days, someone in the town had died. I had been receiving the transmissions for years. I had just been unable to hear them. I sat with the logs spread across the workbench, and I understood, finally, what the voice had meant. You found us because we needed you to find us. The transmission had been there for years, waiting, and something had changed in me, or in my equipment, or in the atmosphere, or in all three. In October, something had tuned me in properly. And then, we announce. We do not cause. If they announced but did not cause, then the deaths were coming regardless. And if the deaths were coming regardless, then what was the point of hearing the names? Unless the point was not the names. Unless the point was me. I thought about what I had done with the names. Written them down. Obsessed over them. Stopped sleeping. Stopped eating. Stopped functioning. Scared a dying man on his porch. Alienated my doctor. Withdrawn from every person in my life, and all the while returning to the frequency, every night, deeper and deeper. You are not on the list. Not yet. I looked at the log in my hands. I looked at the receiver on the workbench. 11 years of equipment. 11 years of careful records. 11 years of a hobby that had been the organizing principle of my life since my marriage dissolved and my job ended, and the world had shrunk to the size of this basement and the voices in the dark. I thought about what the voice had said, the interval between the last heartbeat and the next thought. It was not a frequency, it was a process. I stood up. My knees ached from sitting too long. The basement smelled of old carpet and solder and spilled coffee and the cold. Familiar. Mine. I unplugged the receiver. The hum died. The room was quieter than I had ever heard it. Even the rain had stopped. Even the refrigerator upstairs had stopped its cycling. Pure silence. The kind that has weight, that presses against your eardrums like water. I wrapped the receiver's power cord around the unit. I set it in its case. I stacked the logs in a box. Then I went upstairs and I called my wife. And when she answered, I said, "I think I've been standing very far away for a long time. I think I want to come back." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The door isn't locked. I tell you this because I want you to understand what I found when I came back downstairs the next morning to get my coat." The receiver was on. I had unplugged it. I was certain. I had wrapped the cord. The cord was plugged in. The unit was running. The dial was sitting at exactly 685 megahertz, as though a careful hand had placed it there. And from the speaker, not the headphones, the speaker, a sound I had never heard before, not the wet hum, not the distorted voice, silence with a texture, silence that was listening. I stood in the doorway of the basement for a very long time. Then I walked to the workbench, picked up the receiver, carried it upstairs and put it in my car. I drove to the edge of town, to the place where the old industrial canal runs between concrete banks, the place where kids sometimes throw things they do not want anymore. I threw it in. The splash was smaller than I expected. The dark water closed over it quickly. I stood there in the cold, and the smell of diesel and standing water, and I waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. I went home. That was 4 months ago. I do not own a radio now. I do not plan to. My wife and I have been talking, carefully, like people learning a language they once forgot. I sleep. I eat. I have returned to something that feels like distance from that basement and what lived at 685 megahertz. But here's the thing I have not told anyone. 2 weeks ago, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, and the tap water made a sound. Just for a moment, a low, wet hum. And beneath it, so brief I could have imagined it, a voice. It said a name. I turned off the tap. I stood in the silence of the kitchen with my hands dripping on the floor, and I made myself a promise. I do not know if I will keep it. The interval is patient. It has been there since before I was born, and it will be there long after. It does not need a radio. It only needed me to learn how to listen. And I am very, very afraid that I am getting better at it.